lot of questions during our break about language, so let's take them up. First, great question Jennifer had, and that is that the Italian here in our book looks readable, and how much difference is there between the language of Dante and present-day Italian? If you ask that to an Italian, they'll say, oh, it's a lot of difference. There's a lot of difference. But if you do it from the point of view of someone from another language, like those of us coming from English, the distance between Chaucer's English and our present-day English, as you all know who've ever looked at Chaucer, is very big. You need a translation, really, to have a Chaucer Canterbury Tales in your hand. Whereas Dante, you don't need a translation. I mean, you do if you don't know Italian. But if you know Italian, you can read it. There are words that he uses that people don't use anymore, so therefore those words have to be explained. But it's not like Chaucer's English, and that's because the Italian created in Italy at the moment of Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio, three poets, all of whom live contemporaneously. First is Dante, then Petrarch, and then Boccaccio, and all connect to each other. Those three are so dominant in the evolution of Italian that by the time Boccaccio dies, their three works, Divine Comedy, the Poetry of Petrarch, and the Decameron of Boccaccio, those three works have had so much of an impact on the Italian language in Italy that by the time Boccaccio dies, it has already created an Italian. Now, of course, that's Tuscan Italian. And so first, in the 1300s, it's the language in Tuscany, in the Tuscan part of Italy. But it will spread very quickly. And other parts of Italy will also adopt Tuscan, so that by the 20th century, the language of Italy, the national Italian, is Tuscan. So all of Italy eventually ends up with the Italian that comes from Tuscany. So that's the first thing. Secondly, we'll go back and we will look at the structure of the language, which a lot of you were interested in. What rhymes? How do the rhyming patterns work? We'll talk about that. Also, people wanted to know about the singing, because since it's called a canto, they're asking, well, are they really songs? Well, they were like songs, but they weren't expected to be sung. So these poems that we're looking at, Canto 1, Canto 2, they're not expected to be sung. They were read. So they are definitely created by Dante to be heard out loud, so that you can hear the rhyming patterns and the structure of the language. In 1320, to have this poem and own it would have been fairly expensive, but there were hundreds of copies. So the pattern was for someone to have a copy and read it out loud to a group. So there are all kinds of remarks about this. There are even paintings of people listening to the Divine Comedy. There's many, many references to people together someplace in a gathering someplace, listening to the Divine Comedy be read. So it's a lot like the Iliad. The only difference is there's a text. But it's a lot like the Iliad, because the Iliad was, of course, done out loud. And Dante's Divine Comedy is like the Iliad in that it's usually read out loud. Let us now, part 2, go to Florence, and let us talk about the city that is Florence of Dante, the city of Dante. Here's our picture, our painting, and we can also just take a nice quick Google shot looking straight down. You can see the Roman city on that shot. You can just pick it right out. It's an exact grid pattern. And then if we look at this map, there's a very nice map. This map is useful for you, and we're going to walk right in the street. So just take a look at this, and what you see is the big red line is the wall. That's the Dante wall that follows that red line all the way around the city. The thing that cuts into the wall in the upper left corner is the train station, and that is a creation of Mussolini in the 30s. So there was no train station coming into the medieval city until the 30s. He built that. And that's the only modern thing in there. Everything else within that circle is, at the latest, the Renaissance. And so the red line, that's the wall. You see the red line that goes all around? And it comes over on this side of the river, and some of it is still there. So you can see in the lower section near the green, that's the Boboli Gardens, that is still there. And the wall that goes around the Boboli Gardens is still standing. And then further over, towards the right side of this side of the river, the south side, you can see the wall. And then finally it joins together at the red line again. And there are towers where those red lines are that would have allowed Florence to have a chain fence go across the river. So if they were being attacked by an enemy, they could string up this huge chain fence that would go from tower to tower, and then ships couldn't go through. So that's the medieval city, and that's Dante's city. And so huge were the walls of Dante's time that they never filled in the space. It hasn't been filled till the 20th century. So there was lots of green inside the walls because the moment of 1300 was such a peak that when the Black Death came in 1348, they couldn't fill up the inside of the city again. So that's it. There's your map, and there's our Google shot, and there's our view. What we're going to do is go right into Dante's city, because there is no poem, there's no work of literature that is so tightly, constantly attached to the place the man lived who wrote it. And this is very simple, because to Dante, his poem was about a man of the city. His poem was about a man of Florence, and he was assuming, by having that idea, that we're all people of a city. That is, we're all urban people. He was writing for a moment when the urbanization of Florence was going as fast as you could ever imagine. People were moving in, filling it up. And therefore, he knew he was writing for an urban audience. And so he was thinking of them as city dwellers in an age when, hundreds of years before, people had been living in the country. So the transfer from, say, 1100 to 1300 is this huge change from, in 1100, 95, 96, 97% of people living on farms, to now in 1300, a huge number of people moving into the cities, and 10, 20, and then 30% of the people are starting to live in the city. So he's writing to the idea of a person as a city person, and that itself is a revolution. Our picture is from the south side of the river, and it's looking north, and it's looking right across the roofs of the city, across the river, across the Ponte Vecchio, right in the middle of our picture, and in the far distance, the cathedral dome, and then there's the foothills. So we're looking directly north. And everything about this picture tells you why Florence became what it became, because it had a river, which was the reason it existed, and it was also a great resource for the product that they were going to make, which was wool. So in order to make the wool, that meant they were going to wash it, they were going to dye it, then they would wash it, they would card it, they would clean it, and then they would wash it again. So the river was perfect. And also the hills all around it gave it protection. So Florence sits in a little bowl. It has hills all around it, north, east, and south. And so that was a huge advantage. If we move to our picture of the river, our sky shot of the river, you can see that the river gets more and more narrow at the Ponte Vecchio. And you can see upriver is wider, and then it's getting more and more narrow as it comes down. And then in the middle of the picture is the Ponte Vecchio, and that is the most narrow place on the entire Arno. So all the way from the mountains to Pisa, that is the most narrow spot, and that's what the Romans figured out, and that's why they built their bridge there, and that's why Florence exists. So in a sense, Florence is both a creation of the river, and then also, of course, it can be destroyed by the river, because as you know, in some moments, it has had terrible, terrible floods because the river gets overflowed at flood time. If we look upriver, there's the tower that held the steel gates that could go across the river there, across the river. We're looking at the south side. And then up there to the east are the mountains. Those are the big mountains where the river comes from. So the river comes all the way down from those eastern mountains, and it rolls down, rolls down, rolls down, and then by the time it gets here, it widens out, gets very, very wide, and then it gets more and more narrow and more narrow and more narrow, and by the time it gets to the Ponte Vecchio, it's very narrow. Here it's all tranquil and nice and lovely and pretty. That's the big tower that would have connected to the tower on the other side. But But, if the rain clouds come, don't you love that picture? If the rain clouds come, and the rain rains up in the mountains, then very, very quickly, the river's going to go up, 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 up. Look at that picture. Look at that picture. The water is coming right up almost to the bottom of the Ponte Vecchio. And as you know, in the terrible flood of 1966, and there have been a number of them, but in the worst of all, 1966, the water went right over the Ponte Vecchio. It was going right through the holes. The river was up that high, and it was going through all the shops and all the windows and through those 3 holes in the middle. And if the bridge had not had those 3 arches in the middle, the river force would have broken it open. It didn't. But the water was racing through all the shops, racing through all the openings. And as the water went through the shops, it carried away all the jewelry. Yeah, all the riches, all the gold jewelry of the Ponte Vecchio was picked up by the river and carried all the way to Pisa. And for a year afterwards, Pisan boys would dive in the river and come up with a handful of gold. They would go down at the bottom and get and pull up Florentine gold that was ending up at the bottom of the river. So that's always a danger. Now, if I just change the picture, look at this. Look at how the water's gone down there. Look at. So when it's going up, it goes up very, very fast. Every hour, it's going up. Every hour, it's going up, 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 up. And at the height of a terrible storm, often in November, Florentines are all down at the bridge looking down at the river and saying, uh-oh, uh-oh. Do we have to clear out? Do we have to run upstairs? Do we have to move our stuff out? What do we do? Let's look at our map. Here's a map of the center of Florence, which will let you see exactly where we're going. Now, you can all tell this is the old Roman center is that grid pattern where all those perfect straight grid streets, north-south streets, east-west streets, that's Roman Florence. So you can see where it goes to the left, and you can see where it goes to the right, and then the gate to Roman Florence would have been a straight line across the bottom of our picture right there, you see. So Roman Florence didn't come down to the river. That was just open, riverside. That was just green and sand and such. And only in the medieval days did they then build all these little streets and push the river back a little bit and build those stone embankments and then expand Florence. So there's our core of historic Florence, and the neighborhood of Dante is the neighborhood between the Ponte Vecchio and the cathedral. So we just walk straight through that neighborhood and we walk into his world, and his world is that section of Florence that you see. Cathedral is at the top of it. The Ponte Vecchio and the Palazzo Vecchio are at the bottom of it. So just right straight down, and you can see the straight street that runs from the cathedral door to the Uffizi. So basically right through there. That's his neighborhood right there. Just that section. And all of that neighborhood is like 1,000 years old. Every street, every building, the foundations of those buildings are all back to 1000, 1100, every one of them.